Welcome. My name is Tara Alemany, and I'm the founder of Emerald Lake Books. And I'm here today to talk to you about choosing the publisher that's right for you. As a publisher, I'm of the opinion that there is no one right publishing model for every author. There's not even a right publishing model for every book. It's a matter of going through and understanding your unique needs, as well as the options that are available to you, and pairing them in a way that works best for the book that you're about to produce. And so we're going to talk today about choosing the right publishing model as well as the right publisher for you. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll dive right in. But before I do so, I just kind of want to share the genesis of this topic. And it happened originally because we had so many people that we spoke with who were interested in finding a publisher or who had had a bad publishing experience in the past and really weren't certain how to move forward from where they currently were. They didn't know what questions to ask. They didn't really know what they were going to be looking for in a publisher. And because there isn't any one right answer, it's very hard to say that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. So that's one of the reasons why we developed the quiz that's on our website, which is a publishing model quiz that asks you specific questions about your unique circumstances to help you identify which model makes the most sense for you. And that developed into a opt-in that we have that is 61 questions to ask before you choose a publisher. And that's for individuals who opt to work with a hybrid publisher or a traditional publisher. It's not really relevant for somebody who's decided to author publish or self-publish. But what we're going to go through now is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through this presentation with you. And hopefully by the time we're done, you'll have a much better idea of what it is to look for in order to make your next book as successful as possible. Here we go. So choosing the right publisher for you. We're going to start off in this little corner here about understanding the foundational principles that you have to have in place. And that starts with really understanding the purpose behind what you're writing. When you write your manuscript, it's important to know who your ideal reader is and to answer these questions regarding them. You want to understand why it is that they want or need your book. When they go to Amazon or they go to Google or they go to YouTube, what are they searching for that will result in your particular title popping up? And so you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of that so that when you're developing your marketing materials, you're speaking directly to that reader and the pain point or the need that they have or the want that they have. You also want to understand why you're the one to give that particular solution or response or answer that they're looking for. And what do they hope to get out of it once they're done reading it? So when you have a clear understanding of who your ideal reader is and why they're picking up your book, it makes it easier for you to develop all of that marketing content that speaks directly to them and makes it clear to them that this book is for them. You also want to know what you as an author want to achieve. You know, one of the things that many authors don't really realize is that when they put a book out there, they have started a business and their book is their product and their name is their brand. And so as a result, they really have to think from the perspective of what purpose is this book serving for them? Are they trying to solve a specific problem? Why did they write the book? When you can answer those questions and know what it is that you're hoping to get out of having this book out in the world, it'll make it much easier to figure out what is in scope and out of scope of the book. Are you simply writing for entertainment and for writing to a target market? If you're doing that, you're going to understand the tropes that go along with that target market and what that readership looks for. And so you'll know what to include in your book and what not to. When you're writing to build your business or brand, you want to make sure that you are addressing specific pain points that the reader has so that it attracts them, but you also want to make sure that you have opportunities in it that will lead that reader to reach out to you and develop a stronger connection. So there's all sorts of things that you need to think through in terms of what you want to achieve with the book. And lastly, you need to know the book's overall purpose. For some books, that's about building a community, or that's about changing hearts and minds, or that is about using the proceeds to provide funds to your favorite charity. There's all sorts of purposes behind the book. But when you understand these three elements of what your reader wants, what you're hoping to achieve, and what you want your book's overall impact to be. It gives you a strong foundation that then allows you to determine which publishing model is right for you, as well as which marketing opportunities fit best for you, and what content belongs in scope and out of scope of the book. So once you've done that, let's just take a quick look here at what publishing is, because publishing itself is a very straightforward process. There's a lot to learn about it, and there's a lot that you need to know in order to do it well. But publishing strictly is taking a manuscript, editing it, formatting it, having cover design done, then registering it in terms of setting up your ISBNs, doing your CIP or PCIP, depending on where you are in the process, and also making sure that you've got your copyright registered if you're going to do that. So you have all those registrations that need to be done. And then it's a matter of distributing it so that ultimately it gets into readers' hands. And that's the big deal, is you want to make sure that all of the things that you're doing are targeted in such a way that it's going to appeal to the widest range of readers, or to a specific group of readers that you have identified as being your ideal readers. So let's now look at the different publishing models. And there are a lot of publishing models out there. No two publishers are 100% identical in terms of exactly how they do things, but they tend to generally fall into three categories, and then there's middle grounds in between each ones. But we're going to focus on traditional, we're going to focus on author or self-publishing, and we're going to focus on hybrid publishing in this conversation. So let's look at traditional, because for a lot of people, that's what they're most familiar with. It's what's been around the longest, and so it's very established. And so as a result, when it comes to some of the pros regarding it, there's a certain amount of prestige that goes along with having a traditional publishing contract, at least for the author themselves. It feels good to be able to say that you've been published by Macmillan or Random House or, any of the larger publishing companies. But in all honesty, when it comes to readers, no reader really takes a look or makes note of who published a book. And so that's a little bit of a false prestige there, but it's something that for some authors they truly want, and that's totally understandable. Most traditional publishers also have a proven distribution channel. They may even have their own sales force to go out into the bookstores and do the promotion of their top titles that year. Oftentimes, they have much more professional results because they have their own in-house teams that are adhering toward the publishing house standards. And so it is a repeatable process. So they're very methodical about the books that they put out. And as a result, you end up with very professional results. They know what the trends are in cover design. As a matter of fact, they may be the trendsetters in cover design. And so that's always a positive to have people that really are engaged in what the market is responding to. The publisher also assumes the risk of publishing the book, which means that for the author, there's no upfront costs. As a matter of fact, the publisher pays for the editing, the cover design, the formatting, the initial print runs, the distribution, pays for all of that. But as a result, you end up with some of the cons involved. And one is that you have lower royalties because the publisher is counting on making back the expenses that they've paid from the book sales. And so depending on your format of your book, you may only make 5 to 7 or maybe 10% of the royalties on every book sold, meaning that for every dollar that's generated in sales revenue, you're making 5 to 10 cents on that book. And so that's a little disconcerting for some authors. There also is no way to directly submit to most traditional publishers, which means that you have to get a middleman involved. And the middleman takes their cut of sales as well, or the contract. So as a result, you have to find a literary agent, which can take time. And then that literary agent goes through the process of trying to pitch and sell the book to the best traditional publisher for that particular title. And that can take a lengthy period of time. That lends to the overall fact that with traditional publishing, by the time you find your literary agent, which can take years sometimes, and then the literary agent has time to sell the book, that can take months to years as well. And then the publisher finally signs that contract with you. From that time point, you're talking another 18 months to 2 years before the book is going to come out. And if the marketplace changes in that time, they may ultimately decide not to release the book. So if you're looking for a traditional publishing contract, that's something that you really have to think about a long game. You have to think about, can I afford for this book not to come out for another 4 or 5 years before it actually sees the light of day? Depending on why you've written the book. For some people, that's too long to wait, and so they opt to find other options. The other aspect of this is that there is often very little control, very little creative control over the book, creative and financial. So what ends up happening is, because the traditional publisher knows that they need to make back their revenue on book sales alone, they are focused on the marketability of the book. And therefore, they are going to take what you've written as a manuscript, and they're going to tweak and adjust it in such a way that it becomes more marketable. Oftentimes, that may involve removing your voice from it in the editing process. So we actually have a friend of mine who he worked with a big name publisher. They got the book out, and when the editing came back, his voice had been completely stripped from it, his sense of humor. And as a result, while it was an informative book, it was not a very engaging book because you didn't get a sense of who the author was behind it. And so that created some problems for him because he was using this book to build his business and brand. And there was no way for a reader to really decide if this was somebody they wanted to work with, because all it was facts. It really didn't help the readability of the book. And so those are some of the cons that you need to look at. The other, where we talk about little control, is financial aspects of it. When it comes to traditional publishers, they are going to set the list price, and they're going to set it basically at what they need in order to recoup as much of their money as they can. And so all of us use algorithms to decide what the list price will be, but oftentimes their list prices are going to be at the high end of what you will see books in a certain genre being able to bear. And so it does make it harder. I know when I did one of my books and I went with somebody who set a high price, it actually meant that it was hard even for me to buy copies of my book because the discount I was being offered on it was not very high. So you want to think through, those are the pros and cons of traditional publishing. And for some people, this is a great avenue because there are no upfront costs. If you're not in a hurry to get the book out and you really want to have the professionalism and the clout that goes behind being published by one of the big houses, that's can be a great way to pursue. Just keep in mind, with all of these different publishing models, some people misattribute the fact that they think a traditional publisher is going to market their book more aggressively. And the challenge is that traditional publishers are going to put their advertising dollars behind what they consider to be their top titles in their catalog for the release of that season, because that's where they're going to try and get as much money back as possible from what they've spent on all of the titles. A lot of these traditional publishers are spending minimum $15,000 on the production of a book, often $25,000, and sometimes as much as $50,000 and more on a release of a book. And so to be able to do that, they really need to know that they're going to sell as many books as possible in order to recoup that before they've even broken even on the risk that they've taken. And for many titles that they produce, they actually don't break even. So they're looking for those mega hits that are going to give them the revenue in order to be able to handle all of the rest of it. And often that comes down to how well the author themselves are able to market the book. So even though we like to think that a traditional publisher is going to be able to get more visibility for our topic, for our book, that's not necessarily always the case. There are some self-published authors, some author publishers who do incredibly well because they know exactly what their book is about. They know exactly who their ideal reader is and what they're looking for. So they are able to market their book specifically to that target audience and get much greater results than some of the advertising and marketing efforts that are done by a traditional publisher who's focused primarily on getting the books into retailers rather than directly to consumers. And so that can be a distinction to understand between the different models. Is how comfortable are you with marketing, or with learning how to market, or with building a relationship with your target readership? Because the more that you're able to do that, the more copies you're going to sell. So let's look a little bit about the author-publisher side of things, the self-publishing side. There are certain pros to this. Certainly, you don't have to worry about going through a submission process. You can just decide this book is going to be published, and that's that. You have 100% creative control over what happens. So cover design, editing, whether or not your tone of voice is in there, all of these different things come down to what you decide is suitable for your market. you can have incredibly short timelines because you can do this as quickly as you want. There are people who will be proponents of, writing a book in a weekend and releasing a book. A lot of self-published authors, especially when they're writing multiple books, do what's called rapid release, where essentially they have a book coming out every month to 6 weeks. And it's the sheer volume of books that they have out there and avid readers who will read every single one of their books that builds their platform. And so that can be something that can be very effective if you can move that quickly, but you need to understand a lot of the publishing industry standards and what your reader expectations are. So anyway, pros there. The other pro is that all of the proceeds that you generate, all the revenue you generate from book sales, you don't have to share with anybody else. So some of the cons, though, are that you have a lot to learn. There are industry standards that come from the experience of knowing how to design a book. There are things that we refer to as invisible design, which essentially are those things that when done right, you don't notice them, but when done wrong, they really stand out. And so there's just a lot to learn about how to publish and distribute your book in a way that looks professional, that reflects well on you, and that attracts the readers that you want to be seen by. You also assume 100% of the risk. You can invest all this money in it, and readers may still not be interested in it. And as a result, you end up perhaps having a loss on the book. So the risk is yours. There's also potentially limited distribution in the sense that you may not be able to access the same distribution channels that many publishers do. Although certainly distributing on Amazon through KDP and using Ingram Spark can give you some great distribution. So I wouldn't be as concerned with that, especially when you consider that the majority of authors sell the bulk of their titles through Amazon. And so being on there alone can make a huge difference. But all of the other channels add up, even though they provide smaller portions of the pie. If you can increase your sales by the 15 or 20% that these other distribution channels bring in, that can be a significant difference in your total earnings. You also do have 100% of the costs that you are responsible for paying for. And as a result, that is something that I have a note here. That's something that we also need to think about, because there are times when I'll see in Facebook groups people talking about, oh, well, I published my book for free. I got my neighbor to edit it and my nephew to do the cover, and it didn't cost me anything to distribute it. Well, yes and no. What they're missing there is that your time has value. Even if you decide that you're only paying yourself minimum wage, the time that you are spending on learning how to do publishing by yourself and to do it well, and then taking the effort to go ahead and go through that process of doing it, is time that's spent that can't be spent elsewhere. It can't be spent on writing your next book, which will help generate more profit because you'll have more things to sell. It can't be spent on trying to engage more with your readers so that you can grow your platform. So it becomes this cost-benefit analysis that you have to do in terms of, a lot of people think that this is an investment of money only. And it's not an investment of money only. No matter what, it's an investment of time and money, but it's a matter of how much time and how much money are you investing. The other con is that you really need to assemble your own team. And so how are you, as a non-professional, going to assess how professional these professionals are? Are they meeting the industry standards? Well, you need to take the time to understand what the industry standards are. And that can be a learning curve as well. And so those are some of the cons to consider. Certainly, it is possible for authors to do, and I highly recommend that if you're going to be putting out a large number of books that are, say, in a series, if you're going to put a large number of books that are all in the same genre, and therefore this is something that you are seeing as your primary income, that's great. For people who are using their book to build a business or brand, you probably own a business already that you're trying to build, whether you're a coach or a trainer or a salesperson, or you do self-help, whatever that might be. Those are individuals who really may not benefit as much from self-publishing. And the reason for that is that while they're working on trying to be a publisher, which is a business of its own, they're not doing their primary business. And so there's always this balancing act of figuring out what's your area of genius and how much time do you want to spend working in a zone that is not your area of genius. It takes you longer than somebody who has that area of genius to do, and therefore is a time investment. Does that time investment outweigh the financial investment of hiring somebody who does have that zone of genius? So just something to consider. The other publishing model is hybrid publishing. And this is where Emerald Lake Books fits into things. We are a hybrid publisher. And I do think that this is, in some ways, for some authors, the best of both worlds, because it gives you access to a professional team at the same time as keeping a large degree of creative control involved for you. So let's look at some of the pros. When it comes to hybrid publishing, for the most part, we accept direct submissions. I don't know of many hybrid publishers that don't. And that means that you don't have to get a literary agent involved. So there's no middleman taking a cut of the proceeds. This is you and the publisher having a conversation and deciding how to work best together. You have significant creative control because oftentimes this is a partner relationship. So we really want to know what you think in terms of the editing. We want your voice to still sound like you by the time things are done. We want the cover design to be attractive to your ideal reader at the same time as being something that you are comfortable with and feel is appealing to you and your brand. You typically get a significant share of royalties. So oftentimes that's 50% or more. So that can be great because you have these professional partners that you're working with. And sometimes people question kind of, why would I pay royalties at all if I am paying a hybrid publisher up front for the services provided? And oftentimes that is because there are things that the hybrid publisher will continue to do in order to support the sales of your book long after it's been released. So we'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's just something to think about, is that you don't have to figure out what the standards are because this publisher already knows what the standards are. So you're hiring a professional team to do a job for you, much like I liken it to, do you want to do your own car repair, or do you want to figure out, how to do it yourself? That certainly can be done and it's feasible. And I know I did that with my first car, but eventually you reach the point where it's nicer to take it to the local mechanic and say, it's making this weird noise. How do I make it stop? And have them fix it. And so when you're working with a hybrid publisher, you have the benefit of knowing, I want to reach this particular target audience and I'm not too certain what I need to do there. How do I get there? And the hybrid publisher can help you figure that out. There are cons, though, to working with hybrid publishers. And so you're still dealing with the majority of the costs. You're paying for the services rendered up front. Some people will say that it's 100% of the costs, and it may seem like that, but most of the hybrid publishers I know, the service fee that they charge to begin with often is not covering 100% of the costs, but it's certainly the bulk of them. Distribution varies. Some hybrid publishers have greater distribution channels than others, and some may work with traditional distributors who have sales forces that'll go into bookstores for you. So you really need to understand kind of where you fit in what you want in terms of the book's marketability and where you want it to be marketed to. Do you want bookstore distribution? If so, that's something that the hybrid publisher is going to be able to help you with, but the extent to which they can help you with will depend on what distribution they have in place for you. The timelines are more moderate. Certainly, they can't go as quickly as you can if you author publish, but they're certainly typically shorter than the time it takes to go through the distribution, the traditional public publishing model. And so those are some of the pros and cons that you need to think through. The biggest one is that, unfortunately, there are bad actors in this industry. And by bad actors, I'm referring to hybrid publishing companies that have aggressive marketing tactics, or they are not really clear in their contract as to what's covered and what's not, or they may do a rights grab and try and get as many of the rights associated with it as possible. So there's a lot of things to kind of think through there and make sure that you are clear about what you're getting into when you go into that scenario. But those are basically your primary publishing models. And I will say that when it comes to those bad actors, we did a panel with 4 hybrid publishers that we referred to as the MythBusters, a hybrid publishing edition. And it is a panel of 4 hybrid publishers who talk through some of the myths that are out there, or the misinformation that is out there about hybrid publishing, and why it's not really true. Certainly it is true for some of the bad actors, but it is not true for hybrid publishers as a whole. So I highly invite you to spend some time if you want to watch that video. It is publicly available on YouTube at emeraldlakebooks.com/mythbusters, and you can find it there. So Once you have kind of looked through these different publishing models and decided which one resonates with you the most, are you willing to invest your time to learn how to do things right and do things on your own so that you can minimize the costs and reap the majority of the reward and get the book done as quickly as possible? Or would you prefer the prestige that goes along with having been published in a traditionally publishing deal, and having the clout of a professional team behind you? Or do you want a little more control and somebody to collaborate with in order to get your book into the marketplace? And once you've decided which publishing model makes sense, something you want to kind of think through are your priorities for publishing this book. Think about the time you want to invest. How much time do you want to spend learning how to do things? Or would you rather have somebody walk you through the process? Or would you rather have somebody else do it all together? And that may be a different publishing arrangement. How much money do you have to spend on this? No matter what, you're going to be spending money, whether it's on financial outlay or missed earnings. And so you have to think about which way you're going. It's missed earnings if you're investing your time rather than using that time to be earning money in something else. And it's a financial outlay if you have to actually pay a service provider or somebody else, a service provider to help you do it, or a hybrid publishing company in order to do it for you. There's going to be outlays there as well. So think through your budget. How much money do you want to spend? How much time do you want to spend? You also want to know kind of what you want in terms of your rights. You have to think through, when you're dealing with traditional publishing or hybrid publishing, there's going to be a request for rights. There has to be. The publisher has to have rights in order to be able to do this. But it can be done in a few different ways. It can be an exclusive license of rights, or it can be an exclusive grant of rights. And the difference between those is that one is basically like a franchise. It's saying that, you've got a license to do this, but I still own it. Where the other is saying, I'm giving my ownership to you. And, there's a difference. And so you want to make sure that you're doing the rights the proper way. When you're looking at it as well, you may be granting rights for all languages or just English. You may be granting rights for worldwide distribution or just certain regions of the world. And so you have to think through that, as well as what formats you're giving away rights for and what kind of formats you might potentially want to do in the future. And do you want to hold on to those rights, or do you want to give them to the publisher who can act on them for you? So think through what your priorities are in terms of that. The control that you want to have over the process. Do you want to say in the creative aspects of the book, or are you okay with giving them up and having somebody else take care of making sure that the most professional version of your book gets put out there for you? Do you want to say in what the list price is going to be, or do you want to just let somebody else take care of setting that up and figuring that out and making sure that it's something that you know is properly publicized? Responsibilities. What responsibilities do you want to have versus what responsibilities are you hoping the publisher will take over for you? There's, as I said before, marketing is going to be something that, depending on the publisher you work with and the model that you choose, your publisher may offer additional marketing services, or they may include certain marketing services in the contract. And so you have to be clear about who is responsible for what. When it comes down to, for instance, publicity, when the book first comes out, you want to have that discussion with your publisher before you sign a contract as to, how are you going to publicize this? Where are you going to let people know the book exists, so that you can start figuring out your plan for what you need to know and put in place for when you market your book. Then we get into asking the right questions. So this is a point where maybe you've decided author publishing is not what you want to do, so you're going to look at working with a traditional publisher or a hybrid publisher. Most traditional publishers, as I said, you've got that literary agent in between. So this may be a conversation you're having with the literary agent, or it may be a conversation that ultimately you have with the publisher the literary agent connects you with. Or you can be having this conversation with your hybrid publisher you're interested in using. And we highly recommend that you get the answers to these questions before you set your sights on a specific publisher that you want to work with. And so things like understanding the fees involved. If you're working with a traditional publisher, there may not be any fees involved up front. But one of the things that many first-time authors don't know when they get their first-time publishing deal with a traditional publisher is they may be offered an advance. It's not as common nowadays as it was 20 years ago, but if they're offered an advance, one of the things in there is the caveat that this advance is calculated based on the first year's sales and what the publisher anticipates their royalties being for that first year of the book being released. The challenge becomes if the book does not sell as many copies as the publisher forecasted, and the advance they have paid you is not as much as you've actually earned in royalties, you may be responsible for paying the the unearned royalties back. And so that's something that a lot of authors don't know. And, that's something you need to know about in advance. What happens if I don't earn out my advance? What happens if I pay for this publishing package with this hybrid publisher, or I pay for these services with this service provider as an author publisher who's going to help me self-publish. So understand what's included in those fees and what's extra. Because oftentimes one of the things that will surprise some authors is they'll talk with a publisher, maybe a hybrid publisher gives them a set fee, or a service provider gets them a set fee and says, we'll publish your book for X, without realizing that by the time you get to releasing the book, now there's a whole nother thing that they're going to pitch you. We've got these marketing programs, we've got this, we've got that, and this is going to cost you another, twice as much to be able to do. Well, they've already got you on the hook for, publishing your book, but it's good to know about these fees in advance so that you can decide, all right, when I get to the point where I'm ready to market my book, yes, I want to use this marketing plan, but I've known from the get-go what it's going to cost me, or approximately what it's going to cost me to do that. Same with the rights. You want to know who has what rights, who's responsible for what. If you're going to do an audiobook, you need to check the audiobook requirements in the contract that you've signed in order to say, can I even do an audiobook, or have I signed away those rights if I sign this contract? Same with responsibilities. Who's going to do what when? If the book is edited when already, or if you have a cover design already that you really were hoping to use and you go to a traditional publisher or a hybrid publisher, can I use that or not? Some of the questions that you need to figure out. Also, is the publisher you're interested in a good fit for you? There's the possibility that maybe they don't publish the genre that you are writing in, or maybe you don't get a good sense of them as somebody that you could partner with because you just didn't click with the person you were talking with about your project. It also can be a matter of distribution. You may know that your book, you want to get into the hands of specific readers. In our recent Publish with Purpose virtual summit, Mark Leslie Lefebvre was talking about the fact that he had a book that he knew would do great in gift shops for travelers. And so he didn't have, as an author publisher, any means of getting that book into those channels. But the traditional publisher he worked with did. And so you want to make sure that, if you know who your ideal reader is and you know where they're going to be and where they're most likely to buy your book, can this publisher actually succeed at getting the book into the right distribution channels to make sure that it's in that location that the readers can find it? And so you have to check through all of that. You want to understand the royalties. Ask the question, if there's a royalty structure where the publisher is retaining some portion of royalties, understand what the purpose of those royalties are. Certainly when it comes to traditional publishing, it makes sense that they keep the majority of the royalties since they took all the risk of the book and they've paid for all the financials. But when it comes to hybrid publishers, oftentimes hybrid publishers are offering you specific services that they're doing without charging you, but they're doing them in order to make sure that the book maintains its marketability. Maybe they're doing refreshes on the descriptions of retail sites or updating the keywords or the tags. Maybe they are doing Amazon advertising in the background that you're not even aware of. And that's a good thing to point out, is you should always know what advertising they're going to do, because say they're doing Amazon advertising that you're not aware of, and you decide to start advertising your book as well. What happens? You're both bidding on a click and you're bidding against one another. So you're actually driving one another's ad costs up. That's not good for either one of you. You're not selling the book because the ad prices are too high. Whereas when you understand who's responsible for what, it means that it allows each person to work unencumbered and unhindered by the other. And so understanding what you're getting for that royalty that the publisher is keeping is important. I know in our case, we talk about the fact that not only do we do Amazon advertising, but we also do a lot of opportunity sharing. And we have a Facebook group specifically for our authors where we will post podcasts that are looking for speakers similar to our authors, or we create educational content that we share with them that helps them and encourages them to continue marketing their book, or gives them ideas about, here's a national holiday you could focus on. A lot of our books tend to be, we have a good number of self-help and health-related books. And so as a result, when we see something that is a trending topic that's related to self-help or mental health, it's a good opportunity for us to nudge our authors and say, hey, take advantage of promoting your book because you can easily tie it into this particular topic. You also want to ask questions about timelines. For some authors, understanding when the book is going to be released is really important. And for some authors, they really want to have it released as quickly as possible. And that's great under certain circumstances. I think it works really well when you're trying to build your book or your business, your business or your brand with your book, because you don't have to wait as long to have something that you can work with for building that visibility. But at the same time, if you want something that's going to be attractive to bookstores and libraries, there may be time needed in the timeline for securing editorial reviews, because certain places like bookstores and libraries really rely on editorial reviews to understand which books their patronage might enjoy the most. And so if you're not taking the time or allocating time in your timeline for those editorial reviews, that can be a problem. And to do that, it means actually having the book ready and available and just sitting and waiting for often 4, sometimes 5 months before an editorial review is decided one way or another, even if they're going to review it. But if you've decided that an editorial review is important to you, and you don't build that time into the timeline, then you've kind of shot yourself in the foot. So you need to understand before you make your decision what those timelines are going to look like and what plans they have. Where will they promote it? Where will they distribute it? What kind of marketing is available? What will be add-ons or extras to what I'm talking about? How will the book be printed? Who pays for those fees? These are all the plans that you want to talk through and understand so that you're asking the right questions. And in all honesty, we found that there are so many different questions that authors aren't even aware of asking. I remember one particular gentleman we got on a call with, and we introduced ourselves, he introduced himself, and then there was just this awkward silence. And I'm like, so do you have any questions for us? And he said, not really. He said, just tell me everything. It's just like, well, okay, we can't do an entire process of, everything because we don't even know where you're at. But we do have a thing that we put together as a result called 61 questions to ask before you choose your publisher. And this is just, kind of a sampling of what's available in it. But we get down to all of the different questions that you should consider. My book's already been edited. Do I need to, do we really need to go through another edit with the publishing house? Will my writing sound like me? Will my writer's voice still be there? I've already purchased an ISBN. Can I use that? Or, are we going to use one of yours? Is the grant of license exclusive or non-exclusive? All these different things that you need to understand beforehand. And so if you're interested, I would love to gift you a copy of that particular item. You can go to emeraldlakebooks.com/questions to ask if you're interested in downloading the workbook of this. And we're happy to have you grab that so that the next time that you go to have a conversation with a publisher, you know specifically which questions to ask so that you come away comparing apples to apples and you understand what the arrangement is that you're getting into before you pick the publisher that you're going to work with, because you really need to identify the one that is right, not just for you as an author, but for your specific book. Because it may be that the book that you're publishing today is very different than the book that you publish next year. And the book that you're publishing next year may be very fine following one publishing model, while the one you're doing right now needs another. And so look at it on a case-by-case basis. So the last bit, after you've asked these questions, got all your questions answered, you've decided, you've done the foundational work of publishing with purpose. You know all of these different things. You've decided which model is right for you. You've figured out what your priorities are and asked all the right questions. The last bit is to really do your due diligence. As you've chosen one, two, or three publishers that are your top choices, sit down and do the homework necessary to research them to make sure that they are what you think they are. So go to Google, do a Google search, search on their name plus reviews, search on their name plus complaints, search on their name plus scam. There are sites out there like Writers Beware and Ally that have information about publishers who've been a problem. Also, just plug in the publisher's name in Google and see what the top search results are that come up. Are any of them negative? Are there things out there that are red flags for you? We also suggest looking at their reviews. Oftentimes on their public profiles, whether it's on their website or on their Facebook page or elsewhere, there are going to be reviews of the publisher themselves, but also go out and go to Amazon. And when you go into the books category, across the top in the menu bar is something called advanced search. And when you go into advanced search, you can plug in the publisher's name in the publisher field and search for all of the books that have been published by that publisher. And then just scan through and check the reviews on the books. Are they essentially mostly high reviews? Are they four stars and higher? Or do they have a lot of books that are 2-star reviews or whatever else? Because you want to make sure that the type of book that they're producing, if you're seeing a lot of books that are getting 2 stars and 1-star reviews, then that's a trend that you need to be cautious about. You need to kind of figure out, is this something that could potentially happen to you as well? Also consider looking for referrals. You can ask the publisher if they're willing to connect you with one of their authors to give a referral. But the other thing is using that advanced search on Amazon, you can also just identify the authors of the books that they've published and reach out to them through their author profile, their website, note their name, go to Google their name plus author. See if you can't find public contact information so you can reach out to them and say, hey, listen, I saw you've got a book that was published by so-and-so, and I'm considering publishing with them myself. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were about working with them. And just see what they come back with. It may be positive, it may be negative, it may be neutral, or you may not hear from them. But doing that due diligence will help you identify those that not only sound good on paper or seem good to you in the connections that you've had, but also seem to stand up to public scrutiny. And so those are the different things that you need to think about before you choose the publisher that is right for you in this particular work that you're looking for. I do ask you, if you're interested, I'd love to invite you to have a discovery call with Emerald Lake Books. We are open for submissions, and you can do that by going to emeraldlakebooks.com/discovery. And we can get on a call if you have questions about what questions you should ask, or if you have questions about the different publishing models, or if you'd like to learn more specifically about what it's like to work with us. I'd love to have that conversation with you. So feel free. Again, it's emeraldlakebooks.com/discovery. And I hope that you've found this presentation to be helpful to you in understanding that, when people say, if you have to pay a publisher, it's a scam, that is not true. It's not always true. There are plenty of publishers out there that are not scam artists. They are providing specifically valid and professional services. And as in any industry, there are bad actors out there. And by doing your due diligence, you'll be able to avoid them. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.